Our panel is from Melbourne University and from Deakin and from Monash. So we're very careful to include all our wonderful universities because I think this symposium is really aimed at everyone in this space, not just one of the universities. I've asked if you could all maybe talk for 4 or 5 minutes, and then it's going to be over to you, probing questions, and we have microphone runners that will come to you. So please.
My name's Joe Darvall. I'm an anaesthetist and intensive care specialist, and I work about 30 metres that way at the Royal Melbourne. So my pathway, I suppose, as a clinician-scientist, so I really hadn't thought about a career in research much in my early phase of training. The specialties I've chosen, anaesthesia and intensive care, are fairly rigorous training programs, lots of exams, lots of contact hours, 50% night shifts. The concept of adding some research in there was not high on my agenda, but a lot of commonalities, I think, in my early pathway with Professor Maz's talk about having good mentors around. And I was fortunate enough to have some really brilliant senior academic clinicians, Professor Kate Leslie, Professor Ronaldo Bellomo in my 2 spheres, who really sort of pushed me in the direction of including some research as a sidearm. So I did a little bit of higher degree work along my training pathway, did a master's and then finished my specialties and started working. And I spent a year or 2 after qualifying as a specialist looking for an area that captivated me. And in the interest of time, I won't sort of go into too much detail, but frailty was my thing. We're all getting older. We live in a country that's ageing rapidly. And even in the short time that I'd been working in the perioperative space and intensive care, I'd noticed that the patients I was looking after had changed on me. Intensive care in particular had gone from a specialty that had started out looking after young patients who would get desperately unwell and either get better quickly, or unfortunately not survive quickly. And increasingly, I'd noticed it had changed into an area where we were looking after increasingly complex, comorbid patients with higher degrees of frailty. And so, yeah, I jumped into a PhD in that space, found some great mentors around, was introduced to the perhaps preeminent frailty researcher in the world, Professor Ken Rockwood over in Canada. Again, just fortuitous timing. I've been lucky enough to spend some time over there with him. And yeah, one thing sort of led to another, and I've carved out my little space there. So look, I'll stop there, but it's been a really fascinating sort of pathway so far. And balance is obviously the hard thing, but I'm sure you guys know that by this stage in the morning.
We can come to that. Now for our surgeon scientist, a rare breed indeed. So great to have you.
Thanks very much, and thank you for the opportunity. Look, my sort of very generous early career scientist, I think I'm in the 3rd trimester of my career, so probably towards the end of it. But and I've come relatively late to this, and I hope I can sort of share with you how that was and why it didn't have to be. So I was, some background, I was born and raised in rural Western Victoria. My father was a farmer. My grandfather worked for the United Nations. Now that's important in the background of some of the research I've done in my career path, because I was interested in rural and regional medicine, and particularly rural surgery, and also doing work in developing countries. So I did surgical training, and I didn't really have much interest in research as an early sort of did fellowships overseas, didn't really get into research there, didn't really have much of an opportunity, came back to Australia and was working in clinical practice probably for 5 or 6 or 7 years before I started to develop some interest in research. And it was really based on the experience of the stuff that I was doing when I sort of realised maybe I have something to offer in doing some research from my experience in X, Y, and Z. And I think that was what probably prevented me getting involved in research initially. It wasn't a lack of interest. It was, imposter syndrome is very strong in me. I'm off the scale. And I thought you had to be really smart, and you had to be involved in a research group or have done a PhD or a master's to get involved in research and to sort of lead research at that stage. I found that wasn't necessarily the case, and with experience and if you surround yourself with the right people, you can get involved. And so my career path in research has accelerated really in the last sort of 8 to 10 years. 80% of my publications are in that period of time. And what I'm involved in now, the research that I'm involved in is the research of the stuff that I've got experience on. I do research in developing world medicine, in robotic surgery, in surgical education and training in rural and regional medicine, because that's what I've done and I've got some experience in that. And the most enjoyment I get out of research now is actually getting people like in this room involved in research. So we have a research group in Geelong, which we've established, and that includes medical students that have written papers with us. It includes lots of junior doctors, because the pathway to specialist training involves research, and we want to create an environment where, you know, people at your stage in your career can get involved in that and create mentorship or advice and environment to help. And probably of all the research I do, the most enjoyment and satisfaction I get is actually having junior doctors and junior researchers publishing papers with us and getting mentorship, and then going on to do bigger and better stuff. And you can do that in Geelong. I know it's a very long way away, and it's not Melbourne, and we're sitting in the midst of the biggest and best research centre in the world in this sort of 1 kilometre radius. But there's a lot of really good stuff you can do outside that, and there's lots of people that will support you, and there's lots of really good mentors that are interested in research. And my advice is don't wait for as long as I did to get involved.
That's wonderful. Thanuja.
Well, thank you again for asking me to come on the panel. So I'm actually an adult neurologist. I grew up in Tassie, and I did all my medical training and my medical school in Tasmania. And then I was really fortunate enough to have get an internship here at the Alfred. And so I made the big move, you know, across the border interstate, and I did all my training here. But actually I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I remember in medical school, first when I finished high school, I wanted to be a paediatrician. And then I finished medical school and I definitely wanted to be a surgeon. And then I did internship and I wanted to be a nephrologist. And it was just a really fortuitous opportunity. I covered a neurology registrar on leave. And I did it and I thought, wow, this is exactly what I want to do. It was so interesting. It was so complicated. But there was just so much. I loved the people, I loved the problems, and it actually also sparked a little earlier memory, which was something that fascinated me, I guess on a personal note, because I always grew up playing the piano. And my first year of medical school, I also did 1 year at the conservatorium, kind of just to try and kind of keep that up. And I was always fascinated with the brain. How are we able to do all these complicated, you know, things at the keyboard with memory, with, you know, your musicianship, your emotional aspects? It's so layered. How was the brain actually enabling us to do that? So that integrated for me when I did that cover rotation. So then I knew I wanted to do neurology. I went on and did a kind of clinical neurophysiology fellowship. And then I was a clinician. So I'd never really thought about, I'd done an honours actually in my medical student life. So I loved research, but I didn't really know how to get into it. So I decided to do an overseas fellowship, to apply to do an overseas fellowship, a clinical fellowship in the UK. And I got railroaded really by two of my consultants who are now, you know, great mentors and colleagues and friends really. Professor Stephen Davis, who was the head of our neurology department at the time, and Associate Professor Lynn Kears, who was head of neurophysiology. And they really said, well, let's just stop for a minute, and what's your bigger picture here? What's the bigger purpose that you want to have? And by that stage, I really wanted to do motor neuron disease. It was something that I was really passionate about. I wanted to kind of work in this space. And so, you know, it's one of those kind of moments in your life and career where you just step back and people make a huge change in your pathway. And I think that was a major change in my direction. And they said, well, you know, think about doing a PhD and what's your purpose and what do you want to contribute? And that led me to Lynn introducing me to kind of the big players in neurology for motor neuron disease, Professor Matthew Kiernan and Steve Vucic. So I moved again interstate to do that because I knew I wanted to do M&D, and now it was much clearer to me how I was going to do this and integrate research. So it was a fortuitous kind of collision of events. So I did my PhD in Sydney, And then I had an NHMRC fellowship to do a postdoc in Oxford. And so that took kind of, the next 7 years of my clinician researcher career, but really helped me have a foundation in that before I came back to Melbourne.
Thank you. And we love we share a passion for the brain, but many people who do neurology think they might want to be an endocrinologist. So June, do you want to tell us about you?
I didn't know that.
Oh, that's true.
But I feel like I should start by saying Clayton is not as far as Geelong. So we also do good stuff at Monash University, so come and join us. It's such a privilege to be here, to be able to share our stories, and I'm so inspired hearing everybody else's stories. And the two words that really resonate are, one is opportunity. So it's all about little opportunities that come up, and whether you take that opportunity and where it leads you, you just never know. And the second is everyday clinical incidents that inspire us, coming up with research questions. That's exactly how I felt as a medical student even, just encountering clinical scenarios where I thought, hold on, that's one way of doing it, but why? And is it really a good way? And I think that I've always been curious like that. And so I've always had an interest in research, but unlike modern medical students, I didn't write my first paper until I was an intern. I feel like these days, second year, third year medical students come and say, I want to write a paper with you. So in internship, I was debating what to do because I had always had an interest in sort of reproductive health and particularly in underserved countries. But O&G was too bloody for me. No, I can't handle blood. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll go through reproductive endocrinology pathway. And then as I was doing endocrinology, there were many options for PhDs. I visited many labs to work out where I wanted to do the research because I knew I wanted to do something in the lab to better learn how to answer questions. And in the end, it was the mentor, Professor Peter Fuller, who was the head of department. He's still the head of Department of Endocrinology at Monash. And I just felt that, he was very clinically competent and he had lots of great research ideas. So I chose to do a lab-based project in the sort of signalling pathways of the mineralocorticoid receptor, which is a receptor for aldosterone. And then just towards the end of my PhD, Peter tapped me on the shoulder and said, there's this disease called primary aldosteronism, where the body makes too much aldosterone. And, there are guidelines. There's a new set of Endocrine Society, US Endocrine Society guidelines that's just come out. This was about 2009. But Monash Health doesn't have a set of guidelines. Do you want to work on that? So that was one of those opportunities, a little tap on the shoulder that I thought, okay, let me see what I can do. So whilst researching about primary aldosteronism, I became really fascinated by this condition that even back then seemed to be quite common. It's very treatable. You just give them a drug to block the hormone, or you do surgery to remove the adrenal gland, the source of this aldosterone. And if you don't treat it, people suffer hypertension, cardiovascular disease, high risk of stroke. And then I looked at our data at Monash Health, which is the biggest public health service in Victoria. We were diagnosing less than a handful of patients per year, and it's meant to affect about 5% of people with hypertension. I thought, this is underdiagnosed. So then by developing a protocol for the hospital and telling all the hospital departments about it, sure enough, the referrals started rolling in, and we had to set up the first clinic just to manage this condition. And then in doing that clinic, I found that a lot of the patients were coming with very complex hypertension. They'd all suffered hypertension for 10, 20 years, and then finally they were being diagnosed. And that's when I thought, why do we have to wait until they have resistant hypertension? Because that, at the time, was one of the criteria for when to test for it. Why don't we just get them early? Then you can treat them easily, the screening is easier, they don't have any of the end organ damage. And so that led to the first project in the primary care space to actively screen for this condition in patients who hasn't even been started on antihypertensives. So it was very different to the status quo. And yet, by doing that project, we found that 1 in 7 patients who's just treatment naive actually had a diagnosis of primary aldosteronism.
And that then led to more PhD students working with me on the project, advocacy for patients with this condition, and expanding our endocrine hypertension clinic. So we started with 1 session a fortnight. We're now at 12 sessions a fortnight because we're diagnosing so many more patients. And I recall back then we wrote an editorial for the MJ, the Medical Journal of Australia, asking the question, is it time to screen every hypertensive patient for primary aldosteronism? And it's really pleasing to see, by doing the research, showing the results, finally this year, the Endocrine Society produced its next set of guidelines, and the first recommendation is to screen every hypertensive patient for primary aldosteronism. So it really speaks to the impact of research, especially when it's driven by clinical observations and that passion to help people. So that's sort of where my story is now.
Thank you. That's a lovely overview and inspiring. All right, we're now open for questions. So we have one here. Anyone else already got a burning question? Pop your hand up. Yes, there's one there in that row. Please.
Great. First and foremost, thank you, everyone, and thanks to all of the speakers so far. All of this work is immensely inspiring, and it's definitely inspired me, at least. I've got 2 questions for both you, Thanuja, and Ingrid as well. First one is, well, at least for Thanuja, you mentioned you studied in Oxford briefly, so as someone who's actually studied psychology in London only a couple of months ago, I noticed that there were quite a few different attitudes to psychology and neuroscience between here and the UK. I don't know, I wanted to ask if you noticed anything like that, as to whether, like, how it's approached in the UK compared to Australia, if it's more scientific or abstract, etc. And do you think that would influence the research that's done the research and clinical practices that are done globally, and whether certain topics are taken on board by certain countries?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I guess there's kind of a cross-reference to all disciplines in some way, because there are some cultural differences, I think, in how we deal with different specialties globally. And psychology, psychiatry and neurology for me have been always a very intersected specialty. We can't really, in my mind, dissociate psychiatry completely from neurology and psychology. So we all, I think, work in the same space with the brain, but with looking at slightly different things. And I think attitudes towards that, we all kind of have areas where we feel like we have our expertise in that area, but I think our global attitudes are now really coming together. And one of the best things about having a research platform, particularly as a clinician scientist, I think, is this international global network of people that you come across. And the more that we get involved with researchers in different disciplines, and I think that's one of the best things that research teaches us, is that you learn from having a whole host of people in your neighbourhood and as your colleagues and networks, and that could be psychologists, it could be, our lab technicians, our research, there's such a diversity of experience and transferable skills that I think when you're a clinician scientist, you really appreciate that. And I think we're going now more towards doing that in Australia, but it's more established, I would say, in the UK to have that clinician scientist integrated. So they're, I think, a little bit more aware even of those intersections between psychology, psychiatry, neurology, even from that research perspective. What do you think, Ingrid?
Yeah, I mean, we were founded only, 11 years ago. I'm looking at our CEO, Catherine Luckin, and we were 25 years behind the UK Academy of Medical Sciences, behind the Institute of Medicine and behind the Canadian equivalent. And we came together because the government decided they needed an independent, authoritative voice for health and medical sciences. Might move to you now, thanks.
Hi, my name is Richard. I'm a first-year med student, and thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. It's really amazing to hear all your paths and how often non-linear they are to get to the end. I'm sure I'm not the only med student that's sort of keen to get involved in sort of different ways, but we all come from different backgrounds. We have different skill sets and different knowledge. And as June mentioned, I think the landscape of med students getting involved is quite different now than it would have been, 10, 20 years ago when you were in med school. So if you were to go back to your time as a medical student and you were to learn sort of a skill or a set of skills that you think would be helpful for developing yourself in the research space, what would they be and why?
Great question. And as someone that gets probably an email a week, as I'm sure many of the panel, and Ingrid probably gets about 10 a week, hi, I'm a med student, I'm really keen on anaesthesia, how can I do some research with you? And I think most of the time that comes from a really great place, from people who are committed like yourselves in the audience who are, you know, keen to have a clinician scientist bent to a career. But for many people, and I think this probably speaks to the challenges of specialty training, well, really medical training in general, research as a path to kind of put your head above the trenches a little bit. And as a potential supervisor of a student, what do I like to see? I like to see someone that knows a little bit about the area that perhaps, you know, I work in that space, so they might have read some papers that, you know, I've written or have co-authored and have an idea of their own rather than cold calling and saying, do you have something for me to do? You know, I've got this great idea. So spending a bit of time thinking about, you know, areas that puzzle you a little bit as you're on the wards, as you're reading, areas of uncertainty in medicine and developing a curiosity. I think I was a particularly incurious, if that's the right word, medical student. So that's what I would change. I think also what is useful is to go and make it easier to start a little bit of research with someone. So get your good clinical practice certification. That's a relatively easy thing that doesn't cost too much. You know, then when I'm sorting through the emails in the inbox, here's someone that seems curious, knows a bit about what they want to do, knows a bit about what I do, and more importantly, can hit the ground running a little bit. That makes it much, much easier, I think, as an early stage medical student.
Yeah. Richard, would you like to have a go at that question too?
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. Is come prepared with an idea or an interest, and I also get, you know, we'll get, I think, get inquiries. The next step would be to turn up. That if you're asked to do A, B, or C, you know, to actually do it. And we've got a meeting, you know, we have a meeting every 6 weeks, so it's pretty easy. We say, you're interested? Come to our meeting. If about half the people don't come to the meeting, that's a good start. It helps them and it helps me. And that's so, you know, the next email that comes 6 months later, I go, oh, no, not so keen. So, yeah, be interested and follow up with your enthusiasm.
Yeah, please go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, what would I do if I was a medical student and go back? I would probably knock on more doors and just be less worried about putting, you know, your thoughts out there and putting your foot in the door, and just ask. Because the worst thing, as we heard in the morning, the worst thing that can happen is people aren't interested or say no. But you know, we have this now, I think, a really good appreciation of and interest from medical students. Times have changed, and you know, usually people love hearing of other people interested in what you're doing. So knocking on doors, taking those opportunities, and just having a think about what you want to do, but then, yeah, having the enthusiasm to do that.
Yeah, I'm going to add a little bit of real life to that. We are all 100 hours a week busy. We all get home, we get on our computers. We, you know, when they talk about work-life balance, I reframe that to life balance, of which I have none, and call myself an anti-role model. So I do not like people who come and say, I want to do something, and it's really enthusiastic and there's no follow-through. You've not followed through until that paper is published, just to be clear. So if you're going to go and knock on someone's door, be committed. If you feel like you like them and you like the topic and you want to do it, but it's a big undertaking. And you don't just do it to get it on your CV. I think there's a bit of driving of that these days. You could do it because you really want to learn, and if you really learn, it'll change the way you think, as you heard from Sophie.
I was going to say exactly the same. Tenacity is what we want. Because I've mentored a lot of medical students, and there are some who get through and they get to the end, the paper's published, and they want to do more. And that's great. But sometimes it is difficult for them to tell whether they are going to be like that. But just ask yourself, why do I want to do this? Am I really passionate about this? Curiosity is the best driving force, I think.
Yeah, we all have lots of dead papers that are sitting on our computer that aren't finished, and that's a lot of time of yours and everyone else's, and the patients too. And we have to remember we take patient time to do research. Anyway, who's got a question? Yes, up the back, thanks. And up the back there and up the back there. We need more runners, please. Yes, go.
Thank you very much. My name's Zenya. I'm an MD PhD student from Monash University, and I'm just about to finish up my PhD this year. And I just had a question, and maybe just seeking some general advice aimed at sort of medical students and junior doctors who really do want to get involved in research. Because I think there's quite a few barriers that we experience at that junior doctor level. So, for example, I'll be going back to medicine next year and looking at junior doctors' years, and the ability to really get involved in sort of high-level research, that takes time, that takes, quality research takes a lot of time to do, and effort, that as a junior doctor working full-time, it's quite difficult to do. And we're hearing a lot of clinician scientists who are at registrar level and who are at consultant level, where you get protected research time, or you're able to take, a day a week, you're in control of your hours. Do you have any advice for someone who might be sort of juggling full-time junior doctor work, who wants to continue sort of doing research and being involved? Any specific advice for that?
Who'd like to take that? Richard?
Okay. I have no protected research time, zero. I am involved in a lot of other things. I do global health for the college. I work in developing countries. I have 3 children. Work-life balance, I agree with you. Don't ask me. I can't help you. You have to make time to do this. And I'd love protected research time, but that's not going to exist, and I've given up on that a long time ago. My advice would be you need to want to do it. We're trying to gender the word tenacity. I think that's what you need. If you're interested in this, everybody on this panel and everybody in the hospital can create. There was an environment for that to help you, much more than when I started, and much more, I suspect, when we got started. There is absolutely the research environments to help you, but you have to make the commitment to actually want to do it. And working full time as a junior doctor, I know that's busy. It sort of seems hard to find time. I promise you that as you advance through your career, you will look back to your time as a junior doctor and think, "Gosh, that's my time." You will, and that might not be great, but you will. So you've got to want to do it, and you've got to make the time to do it. And often that time is outside your work hours to do it, and unfortunately that's the way it is. But the satisfaction you get from doing it should be enough to drive you to keep doing it. Hopefully it will be.
I was going to comment that doing research can sometimes be treated like your stovetop. This is advice that I was given by a more senior researcher, that you can turn the heat up and down depending on how much other time you have, and you can keep it simmering, but don't turn it off because it makes it really hard to turn the pilot light back on. But if you keep it simmering, do something that you can manage until such a time that you can accelerate. So I guess your circumstance is that you've already finished your PhD. So you do have to be aware of that simmering time to not go for too long, because when you apply for future fellowships, they take into account whether you're early career or not, and that early career is from the time of your PhD, and you have to have proven career disruptions. So, having a baby is one of those proven accepted career disruptions. But other than that, if you're doing clinical work, that's actually not considered a career disruption. So it is a fine balance between doing something that you can manage after hours, just so that you can maintain that track record. And so it helps to build networks and to have mentors who have networks that can then get you involved in research projects, number one, that you can drive so that you can be the first author, but also be involved in other projects where you can contribute so that you can be like a middle author. And then together that helps maintain your publication output, which is important when you apply for fellowships later. So I'm now probably 80% research and 20% clinical, but I've decided to make that switch because, as you say, it's really impossible to continue to produce high level of research when maintaining a busy clinical job. So
Thank
I think
you.
everyone's got a different way to do it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think we should move on to some more questions, but we have Professor Sarath Ranganathan in the front here, head of Melbourne Medical School, and I just wanted to highlight that I think it's really important that all of Australia gets clinician-scientist pathways, where you begin from your residency, maybe doing 80-20. This is what the UK has got: 80% clinical, 20% research. Then you go into your PhD, and I realise you've done it differently, and then you come out the other end, and we really cultivate that career path, which is a major task that is moving incredibly slowly in our country. We have to get government and universities to chat. All right, who is next? Yes, please.
Hi, my question's for Richard. My name's Chris. I'm a physiotherapist, and I've just finished a biochemistry PhD at La Trobe University. Your interest in health issues in developing countries. So you mentioned your grandfather, and then now it's part of your work. So I just wanted to ask how you managed to incorporate that as an ongoing research interest. So just a general observation, you look at funding bodies like NHMRC, ARC, they're all awarding grants towards issues which are very siloed, targeted to needs of Australia as a developed country. So how do you manage to continue to get the funding that you need to be able to support that work, and the motivation to keep pushing through all the barriers to do that?
Yeah, sort of working in low-income settings is certainly challenging, and doing research in those settings is very, very challenging. Most of that work is unfunded. It's volunteer work that I do. So funding's not an issue if you're not looking for it. It's not hard to get it. So throw that one out. And I've spent several years. I spent a year in Africa and another 6 months in Africa, and most of the stuff I do now is in the Pacific. And that gets harder to do. What we're talking about, finding time to fit everything in, including research, that's now sort of between 2 and 4 weeks a year. And the research, and I guess what I'm doing is not, the sort of research that June's doing and influencing policy across the world and Australia and changing guidelines and things. It's a smaller base of research and looking at particular problems, smaller problems affecting those countries. And it's, as I said before in my introduction, it's doing research on what I already do. And that is, for example, I go to Vanuatu. I've been going to Vanuatu for 1 or 2 weeks every year for the last 15 years. And about halfway through that time, we thought, well, could we train a local person, get them to Australia, get them to go back and do what we do partly? And before we start that, why don't we see if we can measure that and see what happened before, what happened after, and then let's see, look at it again 5 years later and see whether it's been sustainable. And so that's not really hard to do. You can fit it in. It's doing what a lot of my research is sort of just looking at what I do and how I can tell people about it. So you publish that, and then other South Pacific countries say, we'd like to do that too. So that's how I fit it in, and that's the sort of, I guess, the level of research that I do. Sort of observational more than I'm going to do a study across the whole Pacific. No, I'm just going to do one country. I'm just going to do what I do, and then I'm going to publish that, and then the people start coming to you saying, how can we do that? So that's another way of creating an impact, which might not do what you started off meant to do when you started.
But you have a global impact. I think that's fantastic. Yes, please.
Hello, thank you. My question is in a bit of a similar vein for Richard, but if anyone else wants to jump in, please do. I'm a final year medical student, and I've chosen to do all of my training in regional rural Victoria, and I do have a very keen interest in staying there in the long term, potentially being a rural generalist. But I also have a background. I did biomedical science and an honours, and I've always been really interested in being a clinician scientist. I guess my question is, how feasible do you think it is to do both in this current climate, considering that the majority of research hubs are in metropolitan areas, and whether you know anyone who's done this or any tips for that?
I think that's for you, Richard.
I'm not going to lie, it's harder. It is harder if you're not working in an environment where everybody around you is doing research. It sort of comes down to, I think, the general theme of finding the people that can help you, because there are people that can help you. if you're working in Hamilton, for example, where I visit, it's harder, but there are links with other places. There are links with Geelong. If you're working in Colac, there are links with Warrnambool, there are links with Geelong. I'm just using Victorian examples. So the importance of actually reaching out to people and finding like-minded people, because there are people just about everywhere that have an interest that can connect you with people. So if you're interested in clinical research and you're working in a regional remote area, you absolutely can. I work with a nurse practitioner in Hamilton that I've done 9 or 10 research papers with, and he's very much based in Hamilton. It's almost impossible to drag him out of Hamilton. We've done some amazing stuff looking at transfer of patients and utilisation of services and the role of the nurse practitioner. So, probably 20% of my publications in the last 5 years have been with this guy, coming out of Hamilton. And who would have thought that? So absolutely you can do it, and you should.
Yeah, and I think collaboration is the key. There are many centres who would love to support or expand research into rural, remote areas. And as a person yourself who's interested, you might be the first one to set up a hub in that area and then collaborate and then grow your hub into something that can then support people even beyond. And similarly to the previous question about helping underserved communities in other countries, there are actually global grants available specifically for that purpose. So by connecting with clinician researchers who are working in those other countries, you can perhaps then do some background work together first and then consider applying for those. I forgot the name, but NHMRC definitely has global grants specifically for that purpose.
There is a bit of a drive from government to increase the rural and remote clinician-scientist hubs, and I'm involved with another hat through trials, and a third of commercial trials are not in Parkville and at the major centres. So I think there's a lot more going out there than you know, but you will need to collaborate and, shore yourself up in terms of long-term success, I think. But we want you out there being clinician scientists. All right, where have we got this? One over there. Oh, yes. Yes, please.
Hello. So I've been in this session in undergrad, and now I'm an intern at Royal Melbourne Hospital, and there's a lot of inspiring things in this session that I enjoy. But I have a boring logistic question. I think we've talked a lot about the logistics of doing research as a clinician, but there's actually a lot of logistics to put into being a clinician and getting on a training program, and is getting more and more competitive, and a lot more anxiety amongst the junior doctors about getting onto program. So I guess my question is, now we've got the rare opportunity of lots of directors from highly selective units. Do you have any insight you can share about how you select clinicians and how the selection process help build clinician scientists?
Thank you. We've touched on it a little bit already, I guess, in this session. One thing I would say is that you're right, it is getting much more challenging than it was when I was coming through as an intern to get selected onto training programs. I'll give you the advice that I give to people that are in my office all the time. Just do your job really well is the first thing. So work hard, that will shine through, get great references, and most of the time things will look after themselves. I think as research intersects with that, my personal feeling is and we've touched on it already, be very clear about your motivations for doing research. So if you are interested in being a clinician scientist, that's wonderful, but it's not for everyone. And research is, I think, a fantastic string to any clinician's bow, and that doesn't have to be professor of an institute running a medical school. That can be you're involved in an audit project and you learnt a lot and you change practice at a local level in your hospital. So I think we've spoken about how to be a good medical student. I think the same principles apply to being a good junior doctor. If you are keen on getting involved in research, maybe to further your CV, but also to explore an area of curiosity and decide whether maybe I do want to take the research thing further, then all those same principles apply.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think if you work hard and, you know, you apply that dedication to the area that you want to, that you're passionate about, people will notice, you know, your consultants who will then be your mentors, you know, we really see the people that put in that effort and dedication and have that passion, and they will help you, you know, they will help you, but you also have to bring that to the table and make sure that you are as effortful and tenacious and thriving. And I guess the really other good bit of advice that I got in terms of, you know, how to have a clinician-scientist career, how to be a clinician, I mean, I think that's difficult, and that's something, you know, that I still find a difficult question. You know, how much clinician time is enough? How much research time is enough? I think, you know, it's all a little bit different for all of us. And when you start off in research, at least you need to have thinking time. You need dedicated, protected time for that. But when you're kind of getting into your career and being a clinician, you need to kind of build your clinical expertise. So one of the best bits of advice I got for balance was you can probably do it all, just probably not all at once. So at different times of your life, the different things have to take priority, and maybe you keep things simmering on the stovetop, but you just have to change your balance, and you have to also protect your time. So it's also about what you don't do and what you really then make sure you put all your effort into doing that makes a difference. So spreading yourself thin is usually not a great idea.
Yeah, and I think we heard from Danny about looking after your own mental health. That means you need a cleaning lady. It's obvious, but people don't get a cleaning lady. Just get a cleaning lady and do things like that that protect you. You don't have to do all of that. I've just been reminded that we did run a Life as a Clinician Scientist for Rural and Remote expressly last year, and it's online, so you can go back and look at it. Okay, question. I think we've got someone at the back there waiting. Gentleman there. Yep. You.
Yes. Hi. I'm. Is it my turn? Oh, sorry.
Oh, where are you?
Oh, yeah. Who are we talking?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Sorry, I didn't realise.
I didn't see you. You were hidden behind.
Sorry.
Please.
I'm Anna. I'm a pre-medical student at Deakin. And my question is, what progressions have you seen the field of medicine make in terms of doctors with disabilities? I am blind, and I'm going into the field of medicine with not many people to draw on. And so I guess you as really established and accomplished physicians and researchers, have you seen any developments on making the medical field more inclusive? And if you know anyone who has a disability or has gone through some kind of adverse event in their life, be successful in medicine and research?
Thank you. That's a very important question. We're running short of time, so I'm keen to get an answer. Has anyone got experience with this?
At my institute, we have researchers with disabilities, hearing impairment, but I don't know of any clinician scientists at my workplace.
Anyone else?
But the workplaces are very supportive of people with disabilities, and I guess so I'm probably not the best person to speak about it.
Well, I think there's a, and the name escapes me, but there's a Queensland doctor who has a disability who is quite well known and speaks out a lot, and has had a really successful career, and it's changed his trajectory about how his perspective of dealing with patients and his interest and curiosity in research. So I think there is definitely a pathway, and I think in terms of our accessibility, we always need to kind of always continue to get better with that. And I think people like yourselves really I see as our advocates to remind us that we are, we just need to always be, thinking about that and being inclusive. But there are a few examples that have been really kind of shone through in that way.
So you know who you're talking about?
Just a quick answer from Sue, because at a conference last year.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
No, that was Dinesh Palapani.
That's right, thank you.
Who, as a medical student, his car spun out of control coming out of the Gold Coast and realised as they cut him out of the car that he was a paraplegic, and he's now currently working as an emergency physician at Gold Coast Hospital. And, you know, he's very clear about the things that he is able to contribute in a better way because of his disability, while also recognising that there are some things about training, and particularly in procedural disciplines, I suppose, that he recognises are always going to be limitations for him. But yeah, it's a great book. It's called Stronger, I think it's called. It's his own biography. But yeah, it was very inspiring listening to him last year, wasn't it, Ingrid? You know, just the rich tapestry and the perspective that he brings. So yeah.
I think two more questions. One is the gentleman there, because he's had a pages.
Amazing discussions there. I've just got a question about, I guess, informing policy eventually. In terms of my background, I'm doing an MD PhD here at Uni Melbourne, and I'm also interested in the space of healthy ageing and doing so via preventative medicine and preventive healthcare. I was wondering eventually to, I guess, scale that impact to be able to enable that. There might be some public health involved. Would a Masters of Public Health be necessary to go towards, I guess, scaling towards more national impact, or to change guidelines, for example? And how close are you to the people who do have the decision-making powers to, I guess, do some healthcare reforms?
That's a doozy. Who would like that?
I mean, I'll take it on. I don't know, but I would have thought if you're doing a PhD, you're doing a higher level qualification than a Masters of Public Health is. The intersection of a Master of Public Health with policy, sure, you'll learn a lot more, but in terms of that being to your question about a prerequisite to be active in the policy advocacy interface, you know, between clinicians and government space, I wouldn't have thought you have to do it. Sounds like you've got a lot on your plate, learning to be a doctor and doing a PhD at the same time. I'd knock that off if I were you first, personally. Yeah.
Thanuja?
I was just going to say that I think, yeah, there's probably two angles to that as well, because once you get into the field, you make change, then, you know, the policy can sometimes come after that. And, you know, I can speak to my experience, which is in motor neuron disease. You know, we're kind of trying to change guidelines. We're trying to understand how to diagnose earlier, how to look at kind of precision medicine, how to drug screen with human pluripotent stem cells. So we're trying to kind of change our understanding and then use that to try and change guidelines, and then use that to change policy. And one of the biggest supporters we've had is our funders, our philanthropic funders. So once you've done the science, you've done the work, and you've showed the outcome, your supporters, and in this case, you know, we have an amazing kind of network of supporters with FightMND and people like that. They have actually gone to government, and we lobby from that perspective. So I think the science can sometimes inform, you know, it can really be a kind of multi-directional angle.
Yeah, I've got a little bit to add. My son is almost finished doing adult haematology, and he got a Fulbright and went to Harvard and did a Masters of Public Health. Hasn't done the PhD yet, which his mother's not thrilled about, but there you go. And but I'm joking, just in case somebody doesn't realise. But the Masters of Public Health has completely reframed the direction in which he thinks, a lot around drug regulation, etc. And he's publishing almost as well as Mark Dawson, not quite. But just to say that I think there are many ways to do this, and I do think it could add to a PhD, but not at the same time. You're too busy. But it is another direction, and my work in the academy has shown me just how important policy is and changing, and we've heard about the huge impact of what you've all done in different domains. So I think it's a great idea. And I think I said one more question. Who was the last? Oh, sorry, right at the front here, please. Sophie's getting her exercise for the day.
Thanks very much. It's been such a useful session. I was going to say, so I'm a paediatrician. I'm halfway through a PhD part-time, and I've got 2 young kids as well. So I was really interested in what you were saying about the balance, blah, 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 etc. I think more about not so much of the balancing thing, because it feels like it's sort of unattainable, it's one thing at a time, but I'm just interested in the tips and tricks that, looking back, you would have liked or you incorporate in terms of what you think helps prioritise things or make things more efficient for you, and compartmentalising, because I think that's the bit that a lot of us would struggle with at whatever stage we're at.
Great question to finish with. We're going to give everyone a go, starting with you, June. Just a short answer.
Sure. So I had 3 children, one before, one during, one a week after my PhD was submitted. So there was a lot of juggling in the early stages, and that's where I had the simmering going. So I prioritised the children first. And when they were old enough to be a little bit more independent, like primary school, I picked up my research speed. And once they were in high school, I went up to full-time work. So I've really just prioritised the children ahead of career.
Thanuja.
Yeah, I think, I guess in terms of a tip and trick, something that has come a little bit later on that I wish I'd known is take the career disruption, because, when you have, for someone who's, thinking about, having children or things, it's not so always clear to say that you feel like you want the momentum, you want to come back quickly. That certainly I did want to, and I think sometimes when you don't do that, you stop your research clock, which is a good thing, because in that time people are always looking at what did you do? Did you do publications? Were you productive? Were you efficient? So being able to kind of think about that and take the disruption if you can. And there are other things that, of course, qualify for career disruption. And I guess in terms of another compartmentalisation is that the collaborative element of clinician researcher life is a huge part. And it's a teamwork situation. You can't do everything yourself. And once you get to that certain stage, you start working with a lot of different teams, and you get onto papers in that way. And you might not have the time to be, the first author, but then you work in a different capacity and you're in that paper. So you can still be productive. You can still, contribute by those networking kind of facilities that you've created. So that's another thing that I've kind of come to.
Richard.
3 things. Prioritise what's important to you, what's really important to you, not just today, but what's going to be important to you in 10 years' time about what you're doing now. 2, learn how to say no, because the more things you do and the better you get at it, the more people will ask you to do stuff, and you've sometimes just got to say no because you just can't fit that in. And the 3rd thing, have a really, really, really supportive partner.
Yes. And Joe.
Some great tips, not only for career but life in all of that. The last thing that I would add is, so we've talked a lot about time efficiency. There's only 24 hours in the day, and you can choose how to spend those hours. Try not to be perfect at every task. There's that phrase, 10% of the work takes 90% of the time. That's something I learnt probably a bit too late. Don't make the paper perfect. Don't do the task to the best that it can be done. Clearly important stuff needs to be done with due attention to detail, but when you feel like something is pretty much good enough, submit it, and you'll save a lot of time. And that probably goes for a lot of things in life. You're reviewing a guideline, it can be good enough, and you'll just prune back so much more time in your day. The learning to say no is a really big thing too, because I think we're all doctors, junior doctors, doctors in training. Perfectionism and trying to make it right is inherent to us, but also having a strong work ethic and saying yes to things is also inherent in our personality. So it feels a bit like going against your own tide, but learning to say no to stuff and to make things good enough and not perfect is something that I wish I was told early on as well.
Huge pearls. But if you submit a paper full of typos, doesn't get past the reviewer, just say perfect, but maybe not quite perfect, but almost perfect. So please join me. This has been phenomenal. I hope you all thought so. And thanking our wonderful speakers.